MUFON's purpose is to study the UFO phenomenon for the benefit of mankind. It's a more than 50-year-old organization that collects UFO reports from around the world and has investigators to go out and, where necessary, to do an investigation. Most of the time, we can eliminate the sighting from, being a satellite or natural phenomenon of some sort. But in unusual cases, we do have to do more extensive research. In 2008, I had been the state director for over 10 years and had quite a few media contacts by that point. And so, let me see if I get this going. Not working. I had a call from an AP reporter, Angela K. Brown, that I had known for some time, and she asked me about a news article that appeared in a local paper in Stephenville, Texas, a little town about 20,000 people. And I think the paper was like a 3-day-a-week paper, but it cited a story from a very prominent local businessman that said he and his friends were out in the evening of January the 8th in 2008 and observed these strange lights traveling at a high rate of speed. And she asked me, she said, "Does this seem credible to you?" And I said, "Yes. We've been getting a large number of reports from this area, and that's kind of a scattershot of what we have been getting for some period of time." And I said, "I'm going to send a team to Stephenville because we have so many reports from that area, and do some further investigation." Well, when Angela put that out on the AP wires, it went all over the world, and for some reason caught the attention of all the media, newspapers, television, magazines, so forth. It was just an incredibly famous story from that point on. This shows you graphically how the reports that we were receiving went up October, November, December, then peaked in January with this tremendous number of reports. And these were concentrated in a 4-county area. Bear in mind, we have 254 counties in the state of Texas, so this is quite a significant upturn in reports, and we're getting hundreds of them. This is an area in and around Stephenville. I know you can't read those, but this just shows you graphically how many people in a small area were reporting this UFO. That's even a closer shot still to downtown Stephenville of people who saw this craft. So we decided to go to Stephenville. By that time, it was clear that we had too many witnesses to go out and talk to individually. So I needed to find a place that we could meet and have all the witnesses show up there. The churches didn't want us, the schools didn't want us. We couldn't find any place to meet. And finally, a cattle auction barn offered to use their facilities, but it was the morning after they had held a cattle auction, so you can imagine what that would have been like. Anyway, the Stephenville paper reported that we were going to have this meeting there. So the day that paper came out, I got a call from the manager of the Dublin original Dr. Pepper plant. And he said, "How about if I sponsor you for the Rotary Club in Dublin, which is just a few miles down the road from Stephenville, which we also had a lot of reports from that area." He said, "Well, I'll sponsor you at the Rotary Club and supply all the Dr. Pepper and popcorn, for everybody." How could I turn that down? So the paper at Stephenville printed the revised meeting location. And this is the headline in the Stephenville paper, possible UFO sighting. It goes on about Steve Allen. This gentleman owned a very large trucking company there in the area. He was a private pilot and very well known, so he was highly credible. This is the Rotary Club downtown Dublin. It's a very small little town, still has a lot of the red brick Depression era roads through town. And when I arrived, there was almost no place to park in the little town because there was such a large group of people there. The lady in the forefront is Angelia Joyner. She's the one who wrote the article for the Stephenville Empire Gazette. The gentleman in the background with the glasses standing there is Steve Allen, who's the one who gave the report. Well, when I arrived, you couldn't get. They told me that the maximum occupancy of this room was 250 people. There were 500 folks in there. There were people who were leaving because there was just no place to come. But there was an area for me and my investigators to stand. So we made it through the crowd, got up there. But there were reporters from every newspaper in Texas, from every news channel. There was one Japanese correspondent there. There was an NBC crew there. The producer said they were doing a documentary in New York City, and they got a call from their boss saying, "Stop what you're doing and get down to Dublin and cover this, cover this story." So it was quite a melee. That's me and my investigative crew. I think one or two of the Dr. Pepper people sneaked in there too. But anyway, we came, with a large number of investigators. This is all volunteer operation. At any rate, this was supposed to be a private room for the witnesses to come in and give their statements, but you could see the media and everybody else push their way in there to cover the story. This is one of the witnesses who reported seeing something near downtown. This drawing was made by a lady who was an emergency room nurse. She said she had grown up as a military brat, lived all over the world, near air bases, and was familiar with every kind of aircraft that we have. And whatever she and her husband saw was definitely not ours. And she drew this picture of it. Said they were out walking their dog, which was a Rottweiler, and suddenly everything was quiet, and he started whimpering and tried to get underneath the truck. And they looked up, and her husband was an aerospace engineer working for Lockheed. And they said this enormous UFO was looming above them. So that was one thing that was in common with many of the witnesses. Everything they said was it was quiet, and it was extremely large, bigger than any battleship. I was on NBC Dateline, and they were ranking all of the top UFO cases in the country, and they put Stephenville up near the top. When I mentioned that people said it was bigger than a super Walmart, of course, they had to do a silly graphic in the back with this Walmart being going up into space, with rocket engines under it. But at any rate, huge. Leroy Gayton was a constable there in Stephenville, it's an elected office. Leroy is about my height, but this man takes down murderers, rapists, people with warrants out on them. That's what the constables do. They serve warrants and they go after people who don't show up, for court dates, and bad people. Anyway, very popular in the community, and he also came forward and gave his statement about, he was out by his property in the evening, and there was these strange lights going across the sky at this enormous speed. We did do a radar study and found at the time that Leroy reported it and in the place that he said, there was an unidentified flying object. Now, unidentified flying object doesn't mean something that's alien. It just means unidentified flying object. So this was something that was exhibiting non-conventional flight capabilities, was not transponding, and was in the area that Leroy reported it. Due to some internal politics at MUFON, my main asset was a gentleman that was highly qualified, FOIA and radar expert. FOIA meaning Freedom of Information Act expert. You can't just ask the government for materials. You have to know exactly how to apply for it. And to be able to get radar studies from the military or commercial or whatever. It also takes an expert to know how to apply for that. At any rate, he became unavailable to us. Fortunately, I was contacted by the UFO hunters. They were looking for a season ender for their one season a UFO hunter program on the History Channel. And they contacted me and said, could we join you in your investigation? And I said, of course, because with them they brought money, you know, assets that we didn't have, you know, access to. So this gentleman between me and my chief investigator is David Pavoni, who is the producer for the UFO Hunters. This is Bill Burns. Bill and I kind of had a discussion about who was the star the first day he was there. We hashed that out, and we worked together on several more episodes, so everything was cool. The UFO Hunters brought in another FOIA radar expert, Mr. Bill Puckett, who was a retired meteorologist. I worked for the EPA and was himself a field investigator. So he brought a lot of credentials to the job. There's Bill. Steve Allen and his friends, one of whom was a longtime American Airlines won't say pilot, employee, and Steve, who was a pilot, both attested that this was not a conventional aircraft. They were standing in, you know, out in the evening, it was clear, and they saw these lights traveling at a high rate of speed, and it made a turn toward Dublin. And while they were standing there trying to figure out what in the heck they had just seen, it came back the opposite direction, but they said with F-16s and afterburners chasing it. And they said at some point the UFO looked like, you know, well, I had enough of this, and just shot off at an enormous speed, like the F-16s were just standing there going at their max speed. Steve estimated that the distance this UFO covered in the amount of time it took, it was flying at 2,000 miles an hour. They also said they thought it was a mile long and a quarter mile wide. So enormous. Nothing we have comes even close to that. Initially, the military and the commercial radar was not available to us. The government kind of, you know, ignored the requests, but Bill, having been a meteorologist, knew how to get the meteorological radar. And so he did find the UFO that Steve and his friends had reported in exactly the place that they reported it at the time they reported it. Now, in this particular capture, it was going 700 miles an hour. But later, when we were able to get other radar studies, military and commercial, we did find that the object was a minimum of 524 feet to a maximum of 1,800 feet. So somewhere between 2 and 6 football fields long. 2 and 6 football fields long. And it was tracked at speeds of 0, in other words, just looming above, not moving, to over 2,100 miles an hour. And again, the radar did confirm well what the witnesses had to say. This gentleman caused quite a stir. I can't emphasize to you enough how much the media was involved. They were everywhere in Stephenville. Since this has happened, there have been over 8 production companies in Stephenville to rehash the Stephenville story. Everywhere from the BBC to a Japanese company, CNN, NBC, History Channel, you know, on and on. Everybody has been there. And they've focused on the same few witnesses and at one event. David Carone came to us. This is after the UFO hunters had already joined us, and claimed that he had video of the alien ships, or alien, let's say, whatever we were seeing in the sky. And there was a stiff competition to get this video. There was one company in town that was offering $5,000 for it. I was contacted by a local radio station. The manager was saying that he represented David Carone. He wanted to sell the video that he had. And the UFO hunters were desperate to get something, you know, as a big ending to their season for the UFO hunters. So my chief investigator and I were taking David Pavoni to a meeting with Carone, and he said, "I'm nervous. I've never had $10,000 cash on me before." And my CI and I said, "Don't worry, we got you covered." And Pavoni looks at us, "You guys packing?" And we said, "Yeah." And he said, "Can we see them?" And almost together, my CI and I said, "No, Dave, concealed means concealed, you know." So, but he's from California. They, you know, they're deathly afraid of guns or something out there. Anyway, we begged him, don't give him all the money, you know, give him part of it. Let us do some analysis on it to see if it's real footage. And anyway, they went into a meeting room, came out. Carone was all smiles. Pavoni giving him the whole 10 grand. I didn't feel bad because David Carone was a poor man and he needed the money, so what the heck. Anyway, he said he had taken the video from the front porch of his home. And one reporter published these images and said, "This is proof that the aliens are trying to communicate with us." Anyway, we brought in, the UFO hunters brought in Dr. Bruce Maccabee, who is probably the premier optical physicist. Done work for, you know, some of the alphabet agencies and others, you know, long career. So Pavoni had purchased the camera and the video. And Dr. Maccabee determined this was a JVC camera in 32 times zoom with the night vision mode on. And what had created these images were there was pulsation in the night mode. It was focused on an image at great distance and unable to focus, combined with the atmospheric conditions while fixed on an out-of-focus star. So what David Carone was taking a video of was the star Sirius, and he He claimed that he was holding the camera still, but it is absolutely impossible for a human being to hold a camera absolutely still. You just have a natural vibration that is magnified many times over when you're focusing on something at a great distance. So anyway, we dispelled that mystery. Now, one of the things that people don't realize are that every production company that comes into Stephenville focuses on is the Steve Allen sighting and the subsequent the evidence that we gathered, radar, hundreds of witnesses, all said pretty much the same thing about the large UFO. But what doesn't get talked about is that there was more than one UFO. There were many of them. Some were described as lights, maybe in formation, one that would divide into a greater number, or a greater number would collapse into one. Sometimes they would be with this so-called mothership that the media called it, or not. They might just be alone. So what they also don't focus on is the fact that these sightings took place over the entire year of 2008. My phone rang almost constantly for 6 months at least. When Angela Brown put the story out on the AP wires, she listed me as the contact, and I was getting calls 24 hours a day because people were calling from different time zones all around the world wanting to know about it. And I had calls from Japanese people, Japanese stations saying, they would offer me lots of money to give them whatever proof we came up with. But once the story got out that there was money, I had people, everybody wanted money. One lady had some video of a deer feeder with one of the cameras there. And in one frame, there was a deer with a light from overhead. It could have been a flashlight hanging from a tree for all they know. And the next frame, there was no deer. And I said, ma'am, a picture of a deer in one frame and the absence of a deer in another frame is not proof of an abduction. I'm sorry, but there were just tons and tons of these kinds of things coming at me day and night, and because everybody wanted to cash in. My day job was as investment advisor. I graduated here from the University of Texas in Arlington, summa cum laude in finance and economics. And so one of my hobbies on the side is, the economics. It's funny that after Christmas in December, most counties' sales taxes drop off because people have sold, they've spent all their money in December, so they don't buy much in January. In Stephenville, there were so many reporters and people from gawkers from all over the world. Their sales tax went through the roof, because people were there buying every kind of. One high school group was selling T-shirts that I think they said they're here for the milk, because milk is the main employment there in Stephenville. It's dairy farming. They made 10 grand on that T-shirt in no time flat. They put it into a scholarship fund. The Dr. Pepper plant came out with T-shirts and said they're here for the Dr. Pepper. But I mean, it was like a carnival atmosphere for months. But again, what people didn't realize, and we tried to keep it quiet after that, was that the UFO just kept coming back. In October of that year, we had another very large group of sighting reports that we did do further analysis on. And let me, I wish y'all could see this better, but if you can see where it says primary return, those are UFOs that were reported by Stephenville residents that we found on radar. You know, in the place where people said they were, at the time they said they were, not transponding, not acting in conventional flight patterns, you know. So, again, we had another case. I've just picked out a couple of the ones from the October 23rd, 24th time frame. Witnesses see 3 big orange lights hovering above the ground in a west to northerly direction. And then there were other witnesses who saw a row of lights traveling horizontally. Again, we found them. If you can see the circled spots up there, that's a group of 7 different UFOs, which could easily be, you know, seen as 2 or 3, depending on where your viewpoint is. But again, in this time frame, we found an 87% correlation between the witness reports and the UFOs being right where the witnesses said they were at the time they said they were, traveling in the direction they said they were. And in a court of law, that would be considered evidence. So it doesn't get much better than that. Probably the next most important UFO witnesses were 3 law enforcement officers. Actually, 2 were police officers, and 1 was a former constable deputy, all out in different areas of Stephenville. And one officer was in his patrol car doing radar studies, if you know what I mean. And he said all of a sudden everything just got very quiet. And he looked around, didn't see anything. He looked up, and there was this enormous craft just looming over his car. He said, I didn't know what to do, so I took my gun out and held it up to it. He said, the first reading I got was like 13 miles an hour, and the next, it was gone. It was too fast for the radar gun to track. Anyway, these 3 law enforcement fellows, one of them did give his story to the Learning Channel, but they had to blot his face, you know, because they were all threatened. If you go public, you're going to lose your jobs. If you didn't lose your job, you're going to lose your status as an expert witness, because every time we bring you in to be a witness against somebody, they're going to bring up the fact that, you know, you're that UFO nut. So one of them did anonymously give his story to the Learning Channel, one of their programs. But the 3 of them knew each other, and they sat down with some sort of a draftsman program or something. And these, a composite of what they agreed upon was what they saw. So as you can see, they have these lights that were also reported by a lot of people whenever in conjunction with this craft. Everything that I've told you so far has been made public, you know, at some point or another. Generally, though, all the production companies just focus on Steve Allen because it's easier for them. You know, I was contacted many times about this since I headed up the investigation. Recently, I was contacted by Patrick Altima, who is the co-executive producer for a new show on Netflix called Encounters. It's a Steven Spielberg production. but then he subbed it out to Boardwalk Pictures, and Ultima is the co-executive producer on it. So, at any rate, they wanted me to consult on this program for the Stephenville episode. Their series was going to be one story from the United States, one from Africa, in other words, they were going to take a number of stories from around the world that they considered to be the most important ones for that area. And in the United States, they chose Stephenville. So if any of you have Netflix, you can see Encounters has led off their season beginning with the Stephenville episode. They sort of make one of my minor investigators as the hero investigator in the whole thing. I won't go into all the details, ins and outs of dealing with these Hollywood people, but get everything in writing is the only thing I can say. So, everybody focuses on Steve Allen and Leroy Gayton and Angelia Joyner, the reporter, and they leave out the fact that there were hundreds of people who were just as credible, and hundreds of UFOs reported over that year's time. So what we haven't made public is we had 4 different witnesses who claimed contact with aliens from whatever one of the crafts. 3 of them had recollections of abduction and missing time. So my book is, when I first submitted it, the publisher came back and said, we have no desire to be sued. So, because I wrote down names and times and places and people and revealed some things that they said, you're going to have to rewrite it as a novel. So it's thinly veiled. I think anybody, you'll either enjoy it as a thriller, or you may be able to read. Every few pages there's an important reveal. But I choose to lead off my first case in my book is we had as I mentioned to you, dairy farming is the primary industry there in the Stephenville area. And we had 2 different meetings in Dublin where we had a large number of witnesses that showed up. The first one, this gentleman came in, and he's like a lot of small dairy farmers. You can't make a living off of 8 or 10 or 12 cows. So they go out, they tend to their herd in the morning before they go to their day job. They come back in the evening, tend to their cows again. And so they have long hour, jobs, and not too many are prone to flights of fancy. Matter of fact, out of all of the witnesses we had in Stephenville, it is a college town. We had very, very few kiddos. Almost everybody was either middle-aged or older. A lot of gray hair folks. All very credible, down to earth. Don't sit around watching Sci-Fi Channel and that sort of thing in the evening. And all very matter of fact. None of them were scared. They just were curious, wanted to know. But at any rate, he said he went out. He got home from work, went out, was going out to the barn, got to the gate. He said, next thing I know, it's several hours later, and I'm still standing at the gate. It's dark. So he said, I started having headaches at night, having trouble sleeping, and it came back to me. He said, I was laying on a table inside this craft, and he said, I was just barely awake, but I could hear, he said, not in my ears, but in my head. He said, I saw this creature and a military officer, and I could hear them speaking in my head to one another. And the officer says, how much of this will he remember? And this creature said back to him, as much or as little as you want him to. And that was, she said, that's all I've remembered so far. So that's how I lead off my book. Not with Steve Allen. If you've watched TV, any programs in the last number of years, you've heard it over and over again. But this is something that we didn't report. One lady was picking up her daughter from a friend's house, and she said she got out a car at home, and she walked off for a few minutes and said she didn't show up for several hours later. I was frantic looking for her, and then when she did show up, she said she'd been abducted by these creatures, was on board this UFO, but she said I could barely get it out of her. It just has completely changed her personality since then. It's like PTSD or something. Another gentleman said that the craft was so low over his property that he could see two creatures looking at him through a window in the craft. One of the law enforcement officers, who is to retire this year and will no longer be under threat of being fired by his captain, it says he had quite an encounter with the aliens aboard this craft and can't wait till he can go public. He thinks he's going to get a lot of money out of this, because all the production companies will want to buy his story. So, who knows? What we found was that Stephenville has a long history of UFO sightings. I had one elderly couple, they were in their 80s, who said, they lived in Stephenville their entire lives. And they lived out in the country. The roads are not lit or anything, but they had just come back from their weekly shopping trip in Stephenville. And their house sat about a quarter mile back off the road. But as they were turning in the entrance of their drive, said there was this UFO, round globular thing, orb, just hovering above their house. They couldn't believe it. They just stopped and looked, and they said the next thing we knew, it shot forward and just hovered right in front of our window. It was as bright as an acetylene torch, no heat, no sound, and then like it had said hello and then just shot off, toward the tree line. And so we couldn't go into town and tell everybody about it because they would all say we were crazy. So this happened back in the 70s. I had a lady call me. She said, my husband is dying of cancer. He's almost 80. And he was a scientist for Lockheed for black budget projects. And she said, we had a UFO experience back in the 70s when our son was still a boy. And we couldn't tell anybody about it because he would lose his top secret clearance, my husband. But he wants to tell you about it now. And I said, I'd be happy to, thank you, So this gentleman came in, he had he was on a cane, and his son, was a middle-aged man by then, was helping him along, and his wife was carrying a black briefcase for him. And he sat down and told me about his background and so forth. And he pulled out a drawing that it was so incredibly precise that only an engineer could have drawn this thing. It showed, the approximate size of this round UFO that hovered in front of the car, the approximate size and angle, and his car, where it was. I mean, everything was just perfect. and pretty much the same story as this elderly couple had told me about. It was as bright as an acetylene torch, no heat, no sound, and then it shut off. And he said, you know, I've been part of every advanced black budget project the government has for this type of, any type of secret craft. He said, I can guarantee you it's not of this world. It's not ours. So I walked out with him and, you know, made sure he got to his car okay and everything. I came back and the drawing was gone. Now, I don't know if his son didn't want evidence of, you know, from his father there. Maybe he had taken it when I wasn't looking, or somebody else came in. But a mystery to me. Uh-oh, not ready for that one. Little town of Dublin, I knew Mark Murphy. He was a city councilman there. Was going through some of the archives for the city and found a report from 1891, yes, where the number of the town's citizens had witnessed this, what they said was something in the air that was as bright as a burning bale of hay that crashed into a building. And among the debris, they found these like structures, things with what they call hieroglyphics on it. And you know, it was a partial report that he pulled off. But at any rate, didn't go into where, you know, the debris was taken or what happened to it or any of that sort of thing. But one of these bright UFOs that people have described as being as bright as an acetylene torch, before we had flying craft, you know, airplanes or anything like that in 1891, how else might you describe one of these UFOs as bright as a burning bale of hay? So we found a number of other UFO reports that went way back. At the at the onset, the Air Force tried to I don't know, to make the story of the UFO with the F-16s chasing it just go away. And they, some major there who was in charge of the media response said, oh, it was most likely a optical illusion caused by two commercial jets that were, you know, close together, which was, you know, and they denied there were any F-16s in the area. And of course, that was ridiculous because we got these reports from a 4-county area. Not everybody from every angle is going to see the same optical illusion. And then when they found out that we had obtained radar substantiation of the F-16s, they changed their story again. But every time they would change their story to cover it up, it just made things worse. You know, it just caused another media frenzy. But in my calls back and forth to the Joint Reserve Base there to either speak to the major or some other representative, I got a hold of this young first lieutenant who had already determined he wasn't going to be a career officer, offered that he was very interested in you know, what was going on, the case. Said, we see those on radar here all the time and we're ordered not to talk about it. So the military knows that there's active UFOs in that area, and I think that they just had that sortie of F-16s out that night by accident, because most of, I would say 99% of the time that we did get reports, there were no military aircraft in the vicinity, nor did they respond to them. Even when they came close to President Bush's ranch which they're supposed to respond. Anything that comes within that airspace around Crawford Ranch, they were supposed to mount a military response, but they did not. Tells you two things. They know what they are, and they know that they'd be wasting their time to try to chase them. So, I don't know how many of you may know Jim Marrs. Jim is arguably, or was arguably, the most famous conspiracy writer of all time. He wrote Crossfire, the plot to kill Kennedy, that was made into the movie by Oliver Stone. That was a big smash hit. And Jim and I were good friends, went to the same high school, but since Jim was so famous and he lived here in the area, he was getting a lot of calls about the Stephenville event. Now, as an investigative reporter, Jim had a lot of, excuse me, ma'am, could you please turn that off? Thank you. I have vocal cord damage, and if I have to speak real loud, it just messes me up. So he was getting a lot of calls that he was referring to me, because he said, Ken's in charge of the investigation. But at any rate, one day Jim called me up, said one of my oldest and most trusted sources of information would like to speak to you about the Stephenville investigation. And I said, of course, I'd love to. So this fellow called me up. I never found out what agency he was with or whatever, but he said that the powers that be are so upset about this Stephenville event that they're calling a special meeting at the UN and to talk about it to the major representatives from the major powers that are involved in this highly compartmentalized group of folks within governments that are involved with UFOs, extraterrestrials, and our back engineering projects. I said, fine, that's great. I don't know what I can do with it if it's going to, because he said it was going to be a secret. Well, apparently it did happen a month later, and it was made public, not splashy or anything, but there were some references to it. But what they discussed wasn't, what Jim Source told me was that the others were so displeased with our pace of disclosure that if we didn't hurry up and prepare our populations for it, they were going to make themselves known. There would be sightings, daylight sightings, more and more overpopulated areas. So bear in mind one of the things I go into in my book is there are three distinct groups. Those who would like to disclose what our secret projects are, what our UFO capabilities are, what our collaboration with ETs is, and those who don't want to disclose, and the others, all right? These are non-human, superior beings that some of them who live here on Earth. If you want a little more knowledge about that, just Google Admiral Byrd's expedition to Antarctica after World War II, where he came into military contact with them when he was trying to flush out a secret Nazi base after World War II. At any rate, the others say, we can't hide from you anymore. You're everywhere. You're under the ocean, you're in space, you're on the highest mountains. We just can't hide anymore, and they don't see any reason why they should have to. So this is one of the reasons that you've seen more and more of these DOD videos of the Tic Tacs, more public acknowledgement that they're interfering in some of our training grounds. This is not, these people are not whistleblowers that are coming out with this. They're doing exactly what they're being asked to do. Ben Rich was the CEO of Skunk Works. They that did all the black budget projects there at Lockheed. And before Ben passed away, he gave a lecture where someone I know was there, wherein he said, we have the technology to take ET home, and it wouldn't take light years like Einstein said. We found a flaw in his formulas. And he said, and we have the means to take ET home, but they couldn't be brought out to save mankind. So the powers that be that control this stuff don't want the unwatched masses to benefit from it. Free energy, you know, just it would completely change our world. And this friend of mine who was the international director of MUFON at the time, Jan Harzan, followed Ben out to his car. And he said, Ben, did you mean that? We have the technology to take ET home faster than the speed of light? He said, how would that work? And Ben said, how fast is the speed of thought? And Jan said, just that fast. Some of these crafts don't have control panels. They don't have propulsion systems. They're 50,000 years in advance of anything we have. It's an AI system that forms a symbiotic bond with the pilot. The pilot and the craft become one, and all the pilot has to do is think Alpha Centauri. Boom, they're there. Something that we can't even understand. One of my sources was a scientist with NASA. That's where he collected his paycheck. But his real job is to back engineer alien technology. And he said the reason we're still studying alien technology after 70 some odd years, it's not all the same. We have over a dozen different species of aliens visiting our planet. And some of their technology is so far advanced, we'll probably never stop studying it. So, you know, there's just an incredible amount that's being held back from us, from the public. I've heard the arguments of both the people who want to disclose and don't want to disclose. And I think most of us would be in that group where we want to know the truth. But the people who don't want to disclose have some pretty powerful arguments too. It could be an existential threat to the world. It would upend governments, end fossil fuel, and just think about how many countries rely on that to feed their populations. Who would want to pay taxes when, you know, our technology is not superior? Or if there's superior beings that have more control over our lives than we do. You know, there's just some in religious beliefs. Some people would think they were angels, and people would think they were satanic. You can see the problems it would create overnight. You know, so at any rate, with that, if anybody has questions.
I got in here a little late, so I'm not sure if you touched on it. Because you talked about reverse engineering alien technology. Have you read the book or heard of it? the day after Roswell by Philip Corso?
Lieutenant Phil,
Yeah.
yes. And Bill Burns, I might add.
Do you,
I've seen interviews with Corso. I think a lot of what he had to say is probably truthful about. The book, I think, does take some literary license.
yeah, I read it a couple times, and it seemed to have like what Judge Judy would say, the ring of truth,
Right, right.
And then I was trying to think of what would his motives be for lying about it, and I don't know.
Yeah. Deathbed, declarations are given the weight of law in most states. But, there can also be incentives too, even at that point. One of the scientists that I had made contact with worked at S4 at Area 51, and he told me about several scientists who attempted to go public with what they knew about he had worked with aliens there and with anti-gravity. They worked on back engineering some craft that they had been donated and others that had crashed and so forth. And he said a couple of scientists that he knew had tried to go public, and they ended up dying of tragic deaths, that were explained as accidents or something of that sort. So they do, the government does keep a tight leash on this stuff. But anyway, as I was going to say, the scientist that I spoke with said he was going to likewise give a deathbed confession and show proof and so forth. But when he finally came out with it, it was weak at best, and some of it was kind of comical. And what I surmised from that was they had found out he was going to make this confession and threaten his family. I mean, as long as you have a blood relative alive, they have some control over you. So I think, again, that's another reason to understand that these people who are coming out now that are calling themselves whistleblowers, they're whistleblowers. They're making information public because they're being told that we have to. All right? We've got to prepare people. And so don't be surprised if you see more and more of it. Anything else? As I said, my book is written as a novel, and the first two copies, when you're on Amazon, Amazon sets up an author page so that you can know where your books are sold and how many and so forth. So my first two books were sold in Washington, D.C. I'm not a big Robert Redford fan, but he did make one movie I loved. It's called 3 Days of the Condor. And he was a young CIA agent, but he thought, more like a librarian, because what we do is we go through all these books that are published looking for spycraft or any kind of secret information, things like that. And so one day he goes to fetch lunch for the group. He comes back and the whole place has been shot up. So evidently there is a program like that where they do go through certain books looking for spycraft and that sort of thing. So I have a reveal in about every third page in my book. So shortly after the first two had sold in D.C., I started having dirty tricks played on me. I was on the phone one night with one of my contacts, retired military intelligence, and he lived alone. He was on a secure phone. My wife had passed, I lived alone. And he said, I get the feeling somebody's listening in on our phone calls. And I went, yeah, me too. So I said, I'm going to call my provider, who was Charter at the time, they're now Spectrum. And we got off the phone, I called, and I got this young man, I thought he was going to say, laugh or something. He said, when's the last time you thought somebody was listening in, Mr. Cherry? And I said, about 5 minutes ago. He said, give me a minute to run some checks. So it was more than a minute. He finally came back. I thought he was going to say, you're imagining. He said, we're sending out a technician first thing in the morning. I went, what is it? Is there a bug in my phone? He says, no. It's a program called Telnet that allows somebody to just drop into your phone calls at will. And he says, we find evidence of someone listening in on your number of your calls. So the next day, a guy comes out from Charter, now Spectrum, and he just moved here from Chicago. He's a smart A. And, I don't believe it. I never heard of such a thing. I said, well, you're not leaving until you do something. I mean, that's what you're sitting here for. So he calls and goes through all the numbers and finally gives him his ID. And he said, yeah, I don't know what. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. They want to talk to you. I take the phone, and this guy says, we have 3 supervisory level technicians working, and we can't find the source of this Telnet. He said, whoever's done this is pretty sophisticated. He said, we can put in some firewalls and things, but he said, I can't guarantee you that they can't overcome them. So that was one. Well, the thing that I found out was when you have a single provider for your telephone, your TV, your internet, that when they bug one, they can bug all 3 of them. I kept having denial of service attacks on my computer. And one day, I had a call from a neighbor who was retired from American Airlines as a senior flight attendant. And she had written a book about the 9/11 conspiracy that made her paranoid that somebody was out to get her. Anyway, she called and said, there's a panel truck outside your property that with a guy in there that looks just like the special operators we used to bring back from the Middle East. And I went, okay. I went out and looked. He wasn't there. So I said, well, thanks. So I go out to get my mail, and there's a bill from Charter. And it has these movie rentals on there. All the years I've had cable TV, I've never rented a movie. I call the lady up, and I say, you know, there's this mistake on my bill, there's these movies. And she said, oh, okay, Mr. Cherry, I look back through you've never rented a movie before, so I'll take them off. And I went, by the way, what are they? And she said, oh, they're these horrible slasher movies. And I went, wow, okay. So I get in my car, I'm gonna go do some errands, I pull on my driveway, and my GPS starts speaking to me. Turn right, you know, at the next, I went, what? I didn't turn on my GPS. So I get up and take a turn, and then my GPS tells me to go another direction. And by then I'm irritated, what's going on? And I push destination. My GPS is trying to take me to the nearest emergency room at the hospital. Just after I'd had these slasher movies put on my bill. That's kind of a veiled threat. I had so many dirty tricks played on me. I started getting irate phone calls from people in the middle of the night, screaming at me and then hanging up. And I got one of them to calm down, and I said, why are you calling me? What are you angry about? And they said, because you're calling here in the middle of the night, waking us up, just when we get back to sleep, then you call again. And I went, I'm sorry, it's not me. Why do you think it's me? Because it's your number on the caller ID. Somebody was spoofing my phone number all over the country, waking people up in the middle of the night, leaving my number on their caller ID. I did a 2-hour interview on Skype one night, and I forgot to unplug my phone. Fortunately, it was right at the end of the interview. My phone rang and it said, City of Keller. I went, what the heck? This is 9 o'clock at night? What do they call me for? I pick up the phone and this lady said, this is so-and-so at the Keller Police Department dispatch. Would you please go to the front door and welcome, let the 2 officers in? I went, what? I didn't call 911. And she said, yeah, they said they were responding to a 911 call. And I went, I didn't call. And she said, well, somebody did. I said, who? And she said, we don't know. It was a silent 911 call. So we're obligated to respond because it could be somebody, in physical need. He just had, a stroke or something. So I go out, talk to the officers, and fortunately, the older sergeant, I explained the situation to him, and he was understanding. The other young guy, when I go through the house, I probably got somebody in there I'm beating up or something, whatever. But I guess the worst was when my wife was in a home the last year of her life. I was coming home late from visiting her in a black SUV. I drove a big SUV. The black SUV came right up against my bumper the whole time I was driving down this dark street. And I sped up, and it kept speeding up, staying right on my bumper, more or less pushing me. And I went, well, some teenager in a hurry, whatever. I turned, they stayed right on my bumper during the turn. I was going down a dark, bumpy road, and I kept speeding up and speeding up and speeding up, and they kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And finally, I turned very quickly without turning on my turn signal onto a boulevard where I knew that there was a gap in the center, and made that on 2 wheels turning and lost them. I assumed they knew where I lived anyway, but it was a warning. So I was in the middle of my second book revealing more information. I said, forget it, it's not worth it. But at any rate, all right. This time it's it. Any questions?
Is there a reason why there would be those, like the sighting would be out in Stephenville or like in the middle of nowhere, Nevada, instead of over like a big city?
Yeah, it was a psychological test just to see how people would react. And I've got to tell you, in the beginning, everybody was pretty calm about it. They just had questions. They were curious and level-headed. But the more these things came back and the more people reported it, and every time the reports would come out in the newspaper, the magazines, or wherever, our sighting reports went up. It's like all of a sudden people started focusing on the sky when they probably hadn't before. And if they saw a satellite or, meteor or something like that, then they got excited and reported it. So you could see the anxiety level going up over time. But it was definitely as a demonstration.
Wouldn't scrambling a bunch of F-16s over something like that, like wouldn't that draw a lot of attention that they don't want? Because that's going to make a lot of noise. And
yeah, well, it did attract a lot of attention, and that's why it did, I think, have such long legs. A lot of news organizations followed it for months and months and months.
I looked up, because when you're talking about I was taking a bunch of pictures of this slide. Major Carl Lewis,
Yeah.
as the spokesman, he said it was an error that was reported, and we corrected the error as soon as possible. That was his, yeah.
Yeah, when he found out we had radar proof that they did have F-16s there, he had to.
What do they want?
Well, we have evidence of UFOs, ETs, since dawn of time. They found pretty accurate pictures of UFOs on cave walls. Every country in their history has stories about UFOs. The Romans kept very accurate records when they were on their campaigns against the barbarians or whatever on their conquest. Because, you know, they had scribes that would write down about the battles and send it back to the emperor. You know, they want to know how their money's being spent, you know, what progress we're making and so forth. And there are a number of battles where they describe these burning shields hovering over the battlefield. So these non-human advanced people have been here forever, longer than mankind.
What do they want? Why do they keep coming here?
They are here.
Yeah, what do they want?
What do humans want? when
They live here.
Power.
When they test, when they're looking at monkeys, when they're looking at sea life.
Well, let's put it this way. If they wanted to wipe us out, they could have done it when we were cave people. So I guess in one sense they want to live with us peacefully, but they can't really hide anymore because we've advanced enough technologically that, you know, it's difficult for them to do, and they're more advanced than we are, so they don't really see why they should have to. They just want to go public, I guess you might say. Anybody else?
Seems like things are loosening up a little bit because
Yeah.
ABC News, David Muir, Evening News,
Yeah.
they showed the Navy pilots film, you know, and one pilot says, dude, look at that thing. And, but they blur the image on it. But a producer at CBS once told me, he said, oh yeah, we get things like that from the military, they're all blurred.
Excellent.
Yeah, and they do have, the military has some very high resolution pictures. They have little feet on those Tic Tacs. That's one thing they don't want you to see. They come down like this. They're almost like a bug's feet, you know, or something on them, legs and foot. But all of those things that were made public, again, that is because the government, anybody is waiting for Biden or somebody else to come out with a little gray beside them and say, have I got something to tell you? You know, it's not going to work that way. This is disclosure a little at a time from various different agencies of the government acknowledging that they exist, you know. So it's still going to be a shock to the world whenever it does come out. And people will be angry. You've had this information for 70, 80, 100 years and you haven't let us in on it? You know, it'll threaten economies. It'll threaten religious beliefs. It'll threaten everything that we know, right to the foundation. So,
Every so often they'll bring the skunk, like they'll bring reporters out to go, like to a skunk works thing. And I think the last one they did was like we can start doing sonic travel where it's not a sonic boom, doesn't create a boom anymore.
yeah.
It'll be like just a little thump. And yeah, so that made me think of that where it's like it's not gonna be all of a sudden. Here's all the aliens, and it's gonna be like incremental
Right.
stuff like that. Yeah. Where
Right.
like the skunk works guys will bring us out and say, hey, here's a new thing that we're working on.
Right. Okay.
Good question. Have you ever come across any proof or any pictures or anything where you actually saw something that specifically would be an alien life form?
When I was about 5 years old, we lived on a ranch in Duncanville. You want to turn that off, Jeremy? Thank you. So